On this channel, we understand the impact a single fact can have on the human mind. Seriously, one little fact? Believe it. The first fact on our list alone is enough to chill you to the bone. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 unexpected facts that'll change how you see the world. 25. Antarctic whiskey. The English explorer Ernest Shackleton famously survived the horrors of the Antarctic after his expedition went wrong in the early 20th century. He left his dreams behind in the ice and snow, but he also left something else, as people discovered nearly 100 years later. A group from the New Zealand Antarctic Heritage Trust was looking around a hut that Shackleton had built on Ross Island when they stumbled on his secret whiskey stash under the floor. Good news for them, and, as it turns out, the alcohol business overall. Shackleton's whiskey was a doozy, a McKinley's rare old Highland malt, and distillers went wild over the recipe. They managed to recreate it because the 5 crates had been well preserved in the ice. Something to think about next time you order whiskey on the rocks. 24. General's hen. Confederate General Robert E. Lee liked to have eggs for breakfast, which doesn't strike me as a great combination, war and fragile eggshells. Although it wasn't a problem for him because he brought along his very own hen. The smallest member of the Army of Northern Virginia, and the one with the most feathers, was a black hen named Little Nellie. The story of how they met is actually kind of sweet. Nellie escaped her flock and hid in General Lee's tent where he took pity on her. The end of the story is, less heartwarming, because Nellie was killed by the general's servant and cook, William Mackley. 23. Death Row Baseball. Death Row is a place where hope is scarce. So it may surprise you to hear that there was a baseball team made up of death row prisoners and other serious offenders in Wyoming in 1911. The All-Stars came from the state penitentiary, and their coach was George Sabin, a convicted murderer. Sabin got the job due to him being the former friend and neighbor of Warden Felix Alston. The other team members were burglars, forgers, and rapists. It was a short-lived team, as they played 4 games during August, and, that was it. And in case you're wondering, they won every game. 22. Cold blood and fevers. Cold-blooded animals and fevers don't mix. Even so, these animals still manage to develop fevers. So, how does that work? Well, the answer is that they engineer the fevers themselves. Lizards, amphibians, and other cold-blooded creatures like spiders are collectively known as ectothermic animals. When they develop infections, they don't have the internal mechanism to regulate body temperature, so they find somewhere warm to feel the heat and fight off the bacteria. They trigger what's called a behavioral fever, which helps them raise their temperature, briefly making them warm-blooded or endothermic. 21. Marathon stat. Ever wonder why the length of a marathon is 26.2 miles? Well, ask the British royal family. Before they got involved, there wasn't a precise length for a marathon to be run. Marathons as a sporting event started in 1896, with roots in the ancient Greek legend, Phidippides. Fast forward to 1908 and the London Olympics. Because the royals wanted to catch the beginning and the end of the race, the route was mapped out between Windsor Castle and the White City Stadium. This covered 26 miles and 385 yards, which went on to become the standard marathon length from 1921 onward. 20. Wi-Fi Jesus. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Wi-Fi connection? Internet users in the town of Świebodzin in western Poland got a signal boost thanks to a 33-meter tall statue of the Son of God. The statue, named Christ the King, became web-enabled after a priest figured it'd be a good idea. Well, that's the story anyway. Having spent a while doubling as a secret internet service provider, the truth about Jesus came out in 2018. Authorities were not impressed. Today he offers hope and inspiration rather than downloads, which is still a pretty good deal. 19. Lady Liberty Fort. We are so familiar with the image of the Statue of Liberty that we don't notice a really intriguing thing about it. Hidden in plain sight is a military fort, which actually predates Lady Liberty. Fort Wood was constructed in 1811, decades before the iconic statue was sent over from France. Its design features 11 points, giving the fort its distinctive star shape, and it took 3 years to build. The US Army needed the fort to handle British aggression, the two countries not being the best of pals back then. American forces used Fort Wood until 1937, at which point its sole purpose became propping up Lady Liberty. 18. Height and cancer. Here's a crazy fact. Did you know there's a possible link between your height and your risk of getting cancer? In 2015, research was published by the World Cancer Research Fund, and it revealed some surprising statistics. For example, every 5 centimeters added to your height potentially increases your risk of kidney cancer by 10%. The analysis identifies 6 cancers where this problem is found: kidney cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, and colorectal cancer. Now, before you get too worried, I should tell you these risks are small, and medical experts focus on lifestyle and other factors more than height. The research is ongoing. 17. Canadian hockey. The National Hockey League seems fairly self-explanatory, right? National teams representing their own nations playing hockey. However, when it all started in 1917, the national part just meant one nation: Canada. That was because all the teams played in Canada. It would be another 7 years before the sports craze hit the States, with the first non-Canadian team being the Boston Bruins. Organizers didn't feel the need to change the NHL's name because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Oh, and go Bolts. 16. Sortition. Much of our understanding of the modern world comes from the ancient world, as we see with the ancient Greeks. They were doing democracy long before we did, and the way they did it was pretty fascinating. The so-called sortition system relied on people drawing lots to work out who was going to run things. You didn't have elections or campaigns or any of that stuff. The lots were drawn across different sections of society too, not just elites. Sounds good, doesn't it? Unfortunately, the system favored men over women, and if you were female, you weren't allowed to take part in the democratic process. There was also a little something called slavery, meaning you couldn't go from serving your master to entering the political scene. 15. Texas Mountain Clock. If you need to know the time in the future, you might have to go to a mountain in Texas. There's a group called the Long Now Foundation who are busy putting a big clock inside a rock face in the west of that state. Why? Their Clock of the Long Now is designed to tell 100% accurate time all the time. It's environmentally friendly, using thermal energy from the wind, and it can also be wound like an old school clock, which provides extra power. The project was started in the late 90s and co-founded by music legend Brian Eno. Jeff Bezos is reportedly involved with the group also. Let's just hope you don't have to sign up for Amazon Prime before you can see it do its thing. And how long does the Long Now last? Well, the clock will keep ticking away for 10,000 years. 14. Reminiscence bump. Do you remember certain periods in your life better than others? Obviously you do, because sometimes are more significant, where lots of stuff happens. The sweet spot for memories is apparently between 15 and 25, and that's part of an overall age range of 10 to 30. Experts refer to this as the reminiscence bump. The psychological phenomenon was first described in 1986 and lasts throughout your life. While you'd remember the stuff like the day you got married and the birth of your first child pretty clearly too, it's these early formative memories that make the biggest impact. 13. Passage du Gois. Is it possible to drive to an island? An island is surrounded by water, right? It is. But there are times when you can access the French island of Noirmoutier by road, thanks to a causeway called the Passage du Gois. This is revealed when the tide goes out. The centuries-old route covers almost 3 miles, and to say you need to plan your trip is an understatement. Following the tides is vital. Unless you want to try driving through the Atlantic Ocean. You have just 2 opportunities per day to drive across the causeway. If this sounds too dangerous, you'll be relieved to hear there's a bridge connecting Noirmoutier Island with the mainland. 12. Tyrian purple. Have you heard of a color called Tyrian purple? I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't. Not only is this an obscure color, it also has a wild backstory. You see, Tyrian purple was only used by high-status people in ancient Rome and Byzantium, and they made it using snails. Hundreds and hundreds of snails. Millions of Mediterranean murex snails lost their lives to produce the coloring. Many were crushed so their mucus could be extracted. The dye was then fermented and left out in the sun, sunlight being essential for bringing out the bold color. You looked great, but technically, you were covered in snail snot. 11. Hidden octopi. When was the last time you saw a bunch of octopuses hanging out together? Until the early 21st century, scientists used to think this didn't happen, but they changed their mind. Far from being loners, octopi do things like swim around and gesturing at each other in colonies. This secret social side is so developed that experts are giving these places names, such as Octopolis and the less catchy Octalantis. The communities live in structures made from shells, rocks, or whatever they can get their tentacles on. 10. Ascension Island. Ascension Island in the South Atlantic Ocean looks pretty green and healthy. According to the authorities there, it has around 800 people living on it, but it wasn't always that way. When mankind first set foot on the island in the early 18th century, there wasn't much to see. There was hardly anything to support life, in fact. With its lack of plant life and drinkable water, it was bleak and inhospitable. If famous biologist Charles Darwin and botanist Joseph Dalton Hooker hadn't decided to transform the island 100 years or so later, it would still look like a desert today. 9. Speaking Breton. France and England have had their differences over the centuries, but they're connected in surprising ways. For example, there's a language called Breton, which is spoken in Brittany to the northwest. The language came from British migrants who landed in France between the 4th and 6th centuries. They introduced their Celtic culture to the region, resulting in a large chunk of the population speaking Breton. The language still exists hundreds of years later, with approximately 1 million people using it, according to records from the 50s. 8. Chicago Sewer Plan. How did sewers get going in the US? The answer to this question will shock you. It all started in Chicago, where the need for a functioning sewer network became increasingly urgent in the mid-19th century. To save public health, officials had to install sewers. Trouble was, there wasn't any space for them to do that, because the buildings were already stuck in the ground. Chief engineer Ellis S. Chesborough helped come up with a crazy solution. Screw jacks, like the kind they used to change tires, were placed at the bottom of buildings so they could be jacked up. That's right, the whole city was raised up a few feet so the sewers could be built underneath. These buildings weren't evacuated either. People just carried on with their daily lives while Chesborough carried out his bizarre plan. 7. Seattle on Seattle. When you walk the streets of Seattle, you're not only walking in Seattle, you're walking on Seattle. That's because the place we know as Seattle is built on top of what used to be the old Seattle, specifically the Central Business District. Following the catastrophic fire which hit the city in 1889, planners decided to cover the destroyed parts with a new downtown area. Go below ground and you'll see stuff like vintage sidewalks and stores. Just make sure you do it as part of an official tour. 6. 19th century credit card. Here's something that'll blow your mind. The credit card dates back to the 19th century. I should add the first modern credit card was released in 1950, but the card I'm talking about is a fictional one as described in 1887. The American author Edward Bellamy wrote a speculative novel titled Looking Backward, which predicted the idea of a cashless society. He even called his invention a credit card, so he really was ahead of his time. Bellamy's book was so popular, it was one of the top 3 bestsellers of the century, and even had an effect on America politically. People were inspired by the utopian ideas Bellamy talked about, and groups promoting state ownership were formed off the back of the story. 5. Exploding teeth. A filling is supposed to repair your tooth after a trip to the dentist, not blow it up. However, exploding teeth were an actual thing in the 19th century. I'm talking about the early days of dentistry here, when they hadn't gotten the recipe quite right for basic stuff like fillings. 21st century fillings are made from materials like metal, resin, and ceramic. Back then, people experimented, and the results could be a disaster. Let's take mercury as an example. Mercury was known to react badly to the inside of someone's mouth, shockingly, leading to the filling expanding and breaking the tooth apart. Even saying that sentence is actually kind of painful. Wow. 4. Mona Lisa replica. Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa is the world's most famous painting, but did you know it came as a pair? There was the Mona Lisa Leonardo painted, then there was the replica created by a student. And I'm not talking about a later copy, by the way. This was something that the student painted at the same time. Experts believe the student, whose name we don't know, watched Da Vinci as he worked and copied him exactly. The kicker is that the original Mona Lisa aged worse than the replica, meaning the copy is nicer to look at hundreds of years later. 3. Hepatic pregnancy. A baby can grow in someone's liver? Incredible as it sounds, this is totally correct. When something like that happens, it's a medical emergency called a hepatic pregnancy. The fertilized egg is supposed to find the uterus where it develops into a fetus. In rare situations, it can miss and attach itself to the liver instead. This could lead to severe bleeding, and surgery is used to remove the egg. The good news is that it seems to be a super rare situation with well under 50 recorded cases worldwide. 2. Biohazard symbol. The classic biohazard symbol really stands out. Its design is unmistakable, and when you see it, you know there is danger close by. But apart from looking cool and like something from a sci-fi movie, what does the symbol represent? This brings me to my next amazing fact, which is, it doesn't represent anything. It certainly isn't depicting any biohazards, that's for sure. Charles Baldwin, the Dow chemical engineer who created the design in the 60s, wanted something that people wouldn't forget. His symbol is unlike any other symbol out there, making it perfect for the freaky world of biohazards. 1. Fruit fly versus fruit fly. Why use pesticides when you can use pests? Colima, a state in western Mexico, has recently started turning fruit flies against each other to protect fruit crops. They're doing this by creating completely sterile male flies, who are then sent to mingle with the females. Little do the female flies suspect the fly they're mating with has been irradiated and is firing blanks. The idea is to slowly wipe out the pests, one insect intercourse session at a time. It's a chemical-free process, and no one is harmed. Except, the poor flies. Now, here's one more fact before I go that'll mess with your mind, but I am going to ask it as your daily trivia question. What did the Soviet Union trade 17 submarines for in 1989? Was it A, Michael Jackson tickets, B, 30,000 Big Macs, C, exclusive Nike Air Kremlin sneakers, or D, $3 billion worth of Pepsi? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Now, I'm going to be stretching your brain muscles even further with our next video, 25 facts that'll make you stop and say, I can't believe I didn't know that, which is ready to watch right here. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, do that whole thing, follow my social medias, follow our social medias, everything like that, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.